to lower the individual income tax. We fell $400 million short of that. You've talked publicly about wanting to get to zero, which is a priority, especially with us right next to Tennessee that has 0% income tax. How would you go about doing that? What are your priorities for tax reform if you were to be elected?
Well, Jacqueline, I want to thank you, and I want to thank the folks of the Kentucky Chamber for hosting this informative forum as it relates to the governor's race. And thank you to all the members of the Chamber, whether you're a small business or a large business. I appreciate you. I'm grateful for you, and am thankful for the way that you invest in our communities and create jobs for our communities. And so thank you all again for what you do for 120 counties. And, as I travel the state, I think there are three fundamental issues that arise as it relates to the folks that I see in our 120 counties. And those things are workforce, low crime, and quality education. And in addition to that, when you think of workforce, obviously you can't disconnect that from tax reform. And again, the question that I think we'll all have to answer over the course of these next several weeks before November 7th is who is best positioned to help all of us in this room as it relates to our workforce, as it relates to quality education, and as it relates to low crime. And I submit to you, I'm the only candidate that is running for governor this year that has the relationships with our legislature to get the big things done on those core issues that are important to our foundation. I mean, on the issue of tax reform, I will be the only candidate here tonight that will tell you that I want to eliminate Kentucky's income tax. And I want to do that because I knew you all wanted tax reform here. But I will do that because I understand to attract, you talk about Tennessee. I mean, 30 years ago, and everybody, this is no secret in this room, 30 years ago, Kentucky and Tennessee were essentially the same size. But because Tennessee has a pro-growth mindset, it's moved past us in terms of its population. I want people, whether they're traveling 65 south or 75 south, to make the judgment and the decision to stop here because we have a tax environment that keeps people here in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. But in addition to that, in addition to eliminating the income tax rate, I think it's also important that we have low crime and that we have a quality education system. And the other person that is running in this race, I would say, has actually made those things worse here in Kentucky. On the issue of education, he shut our schools down for 2 years. On the issue of violent crime, he essentially let 2,000 criminals out in 2020, and a third of those recommitted felony offenses, making our communities less safe and law enforcement's job more difficult. But on the issue of tax reform, again, let's eliminate the income tax. Let's look, at the end of the day, this is about your hard-earned money and making sure that you keep it in your pocket. We know because of the Biden administration, and they call it Bidenomics, I think the rest of us just call it 40-year high record inflation. Because of that, we need more of the money in our pockets. I mean, groceries are more expensive. Gas is more expensive. Securing childcare is more expensive right now. And so again, I don't think you should be penalized for deciding to get up every morning and go to work. We need to put more money in your pocket so you can pay for those things, pay for your kids' travel sports teams as well. I mean, these are the sorts of things that we've got to be thinking about if we want this Commonwealth to grow.
Circling back real quick, especially as we look to lower the income tax, again, we've got some triggers in that bill that aren't really met right now. The other ways to lower that would be to broaden the sales tax base or to increase the sales tax. How would you do that if you were governor?
Well, look, this is, and I think this is the important distinction to make between me and Andy Beshear, is that I have the relationships with our legislature to get these big things done for our Commonwealth. Look, our economy should be doing much better, but because of Joe Biden and because Andy Beshear, look, let me remind you, I mean, you all, Jacqueline, you know this, when our legislature decided to make the common sense decision to give you more of your hard-earned money, there was one person in Frankfort that stood opposed to that, and that was Andy Beshear. When they got the ball rolling on tax cuts and tax reforms for this Commonwealth, Andy Beshear vetoed that legislation because he did not understand how important it is to get money back into your pocket. So to your question, Jacqueline, I'm going to work with our legislature. I'm going to make sure as part of the first budget that we have a conversation. And look, I'm delighted tonight to be here with my running mate, Senator Robbie Mills from Henderson County. Robbie Mills is a member of our legislature right now. And Robbie is going to be a great partner in making sure that we have those important conversations about what it looks like to work with Chairman McDaniel, to work with Jason Petrie in the House, to get our income tax rate down to zero as quickly as we possibly can.
So you mentioned working with the legislature. Obviously, we know that being in the same party does not always mean smooth sailing between a governor and a General Assembly. So what would your other priorities be? You've kind of mentioned some of them in your first 100 days, and how would you work with the legislature to get that done? Because again, we've seen that it doesn't always work when you're just in the same party.
Well, I think I'm a pretty likable guy. And so, but in addition to that, you know, I've really tried over the last 3.5 years to cultivate relationships with our legislature. And I see my friend Kevin Bratcher here. I see obviously Robbie Mills. I saw Senator Boswell somewhere here earlier. I mean, these are folks that I've got their cell phone numbers, that I talk to them pretty regularly about the issues that are occurring right now in Frankfort. I mean, I've told people repeatedly, as the Attorney General, I believe it's my job to defend the legislation that's passed by our General Assembly. And because of those relationships that I've built over the course of the last 3.5 years as Attorney General, I'm confident that I can get these big things done for the Kentucky. But in addition to that, I don't take anything for granted. And so, Jacqueline, you're aware that over the course of these last couple of months, look, as a nominee for governor, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, it's not only to talk about the things that the other person hasn't done, it's also really important to offer a vision for the future. Look, Ronald Reagan would talk about this all the time. In his 1980 acceptance speech, he talked about the Republican Party having programs for the future and ideas for the future. And that's what I'm trying to bring to the table in terms of this race, is to talk about a vision for our future. That's why I've unveiled the Cameron Catch-Up Plan, which is a dynamic education plan about catching our kids up. And I've offered a public safety plan, which is a 12-point plan, again, about keeping our communities safe. But I mention those things because before I unveiled them, I talked to the members of our legislature. I talked to Speaker Osborne. I talked to President Stivers, because it is important not only to talk about these things in word, but also to undertake actions that can make sure that these ambitious things can get passed. Because again, whether it is violent crime or quality education or workforce challenges that we have here, someone has got to be willing to address those things. And as I started off talking about, who can you trust to address those? Who has the relationships with the legislature to get things done as it relates to solving those problems? I firmly believe that I do, because of those relationships, because I take the time to talk to the members of our legislature before putting anything out. And that's why the education plan and the public safety plan are going to get passed as the next governor of the Commonwealth of Kentucky.
You bring up education. Workforce is the #1 issue facing many in this room, especially job creators. We know that right now in Kentucky, we have more jobs than we have people looking. So obviously you're talking about a vision for the future of Kentucky. I know that everyone so far on the stage has talked about population growth. How would you look to grow our workforce to address this crisis?
Well, Jacqueline, I mean, this is one of the disappointments that I think we've seen collectively over the course of the last 3.5 years. I mean, since this governor has taken office, there are 27,000 fewer Kentuckians working in our Commonwealth. Our workforce participation rate is 47th in the nation. Right now, there are nearly 79,000 individuals on unemployment. And that's not to mention the tens of thousands that aren't even looking for jobs. And as we think about some of these projects that are coming online, how are we going to fuel these projects if we don't have the workforce? And I tell you today, I will be the workforce governor. And I contrast that with Andy Beshear, who in many ways has been the welfare governor. I mean, here is a governor that, as a lot of you all can attest to, shut down your businesses for nearly 2 years. I was just with some chiropractors yesterday. We were the only state in the country to shut down chiropractors. Again, a lot of small businesses were shut down. I was with a group yesterday, Nursing Home Association. There was a gentleman in that room that told me that he has not seen a workforce crisis here in Kentucky to the magnitude that it is right now over the 42 years that he has been as a nursing home provider. Again, that is not something that we should accept as the status quo. And it is really important that you have leadership at the top that is willing to address this issue. And so when I talk about reducing and eliminating our income taxes, because I want people to go to work in the morning and know that they're not going to be taxed simply because they go to work. I think that will help drive people into our workforce. The other thing that we can do, and look, this is a common sense idea. This is not something that is some far-fetched idea. Look, I understand that when I talk to our healthcare providers, the expansion of Medicaid was important, particularly for our rural providers. I understand that. But what I don't understand is if you expand Medicaid coverage to able-bodied individuals, why we didn't condition that on some sort of work requirement, particularly if we think about it in the lens of wanting to keep the program solvent for means-tested and medically necessary individuals. So again, I think, look, you all are the job creators. Government can sort of set the conditions, and our legislature has done a fantastic job of doing that as they made reforms to prevailing wage law, right to work law. So I applaud the members of our Republican legislature that have led on that issue. But you also need leadership at the top that is going to look for ways to address this issue. And one of the things I will do as the next governor of Kentucky is apply for a waiver with CMS to have those work requirements as it relates to able-bodied participants. Because again, I want to establish a culture of work here in Kentucky. And I think it's unfortunate that over the last 3.5 years, Andy Beshear in many ways has established a culture of dependency on government.
We've seen, as we talk about growth of workforce and business in particular, we've seen a lot of big announcements made in the last couple of years with investments in Kentucky. So how would you continue that success? And what do you view as the role of the governor in that process? How would you sell Kentucky when you're talking to these businesses who want to locate here?
Well, look, I think it is incredibly important for any governor of any state to be engaged daily on improving the economic health and vitality of a state. And I firmly will be a governor that does that. And I'm going to champion everyone's industry that is in this room. But in addition to that, I think you need a governor that sends the right message to the rest of the nation as it relates to our workforce and having a friendly environment to business. And I don't think that has happened over the last few years because, again, here's a governor that shut our small businesses down. He picked winners and losers. He told some folks that they could stay open and some had to shut their doors, not to mention the churches that he shut all across Kentucky. And I just don't think that is the way that government should work. I mean, now, a lot of our red state colleagues and border states, they were looking for ways to keep their states open, but Andy Beshear and Gavin Newsom were looking for ways to shut our state down. Again, that is not the way in which I think this Commonwealth should be run. And so I'm going to be a governor that's fighting daily to make sure that we have every opportunity to recruit businesses. And the ways in which you do that, I think, and believe firmly, are through making sure that this Commonwealth is as safe as it can be and that we provide a world-class education system. And again, when I talk about education, I talk about it from the context of being married to a school teacher. My wife, Mackenzie, spent nearly 7 years in the Oldham County school system, teaching 5th and 3rd grade. My sister-in-law teaches in JCPS right now. My mom retired as a public educator. And so we believe wholeheartedly in the public education system. And we know, and as a lot of you all do in this room, that when you are attracting people into the Commonwealth, they essentially want to know a couple of things. They want to know, do you have good schools? And is it safe? And because of some of the things that Andy Beshear has done over the course of these last 3.5 years, we can't answer the way that I believe we should. I mean, he shut our schools down for nearly 2 years. Our kids have significant learning loss because of it. And because of that learning loss, our kids could, based on the reports that are out, lose out on tens of thousands of dollars of earning income and potential. And you talk about fueling the workforce for the future. That workforce won't be there if we stay on this current path and if we accept the status quo. And then you talk about crime. I mean, we are right now in Jefferson County, in Louisville. Over the course of the last 3.5 years, there's been nearly an 80% increase in the homicide rate here in just Jefferson County. If you look statewide, there's been a 30% increase. I mean, that again is not something we should be willing to accept as business leaders, as folks that care deeply about the fabric of this Commonwealth, who care deeply about our families. And if you're looking to attract businesses and recruit people to a state, you've got to have plans to address those issues. That's why we've put out the education plan. That's why we've put out the public safety plan. Because I look at these as core foundational issues that are about restoring the structure and the foundation of our Commonwealth. Let's get those right. Let's make sure we're paying our teachers. Let's make sure we're having an innovative 16-week program for our kids to catch them up on reading, science, and math. Let's make sure we're removing bureaucracy from the classroom. I mean, there were countless times when Mackenzie would come home and she'd tell me she just finished filling out the professional growth plan, the PGP, if you will. And she'd say she'd send it off to the Kentucky Department of Education and she'd never receive any feedback on it. Again, we can't just do paperwork for paperwork's sake. We have to make sure that our students and our teachers are connecting so that ultimately they can fuel this workforce for the future. That's why I put forward these plans, because it is about collectively making sure that we can recruit more people into this Commonwealth.
As we talk about attracting people and industry into Kentucky, one of the biggest selling points for Kentucky is our signature industries. That includes bourbon and horse racing. We have some new laws in Kentucky, including phasing out of the bourbon barrel tax, sports wagering, and elimination of gray machines. So how would you champion signature industries in Kentucky, and what are your opinions on some of those new laws that we have here in the state?
Well, I applaud the legislature for undertaking the work as it relates to the equine industry and making sure that we preserve our bourbon industry. I mean, these are our legacy industries that we have to take care of. There's certainly no question about that. But I imagine, and Jacqueline, to your question, I imagine that if you are in this room right now, you wholeheartedly believe, as you should, that the industry that you represent is a signature industry. And that's whether you are Atlas Air, that's whether you're at CVG, that's whether you're at UPS, whether you're at Swedish Match that I just visited last week. You that are in this room recognize that your industry is a signature industry. And as a philosophical matter, I firmly believe that we've got to make sure that more money stays in your pocket so that you all can invest in your facilities, invest in your industries, so that you can grow here, you can stay here. Look, part of the analysis is not only will you come here, it's will you stay here? And we have to be thinking about, again, whether it's the steps our legislature has taken to ensure that our bourbon industry stays here, our equine industry, whether it is able to flourish. We've got to be making decisions that help our industries, again, all of them, our signature industries, stay here in our Commonwealth. And I am certainly committed to working with our legislature to make sure that happens.
And just to circle back, because those bills did have bipartisan support and they were signed by Governor Beshear, and I know that a lot of the candidates in the primary were talking about these issues, but I'd love to hear your opinions on sports wagering in particular.
Yeah, I'm pleased that we have sports wagering here in the Commonwealth. And I certainly think that it will have an economic benefit to our state. There's no question about that. But in addition, and again, this is why I keep going back to these bread and butter issues that folks across Kentucky are thinking about. I mean, again, whether it is the Biden economy or whether it is the fact that you are simply trying to grow your business or make payroll. Look, my parents owned a small business in E-Town. It was a coffee shop. It was a little bit ahead of the Starbucks craze, but they did okay for a few years. But I remember vividly the fact that they were trying to make payroll. We drove down to Clearwater, Florida to buy a coffee roaster, brought it back to Kentucky because my dad thought that would give us a competitive advantage when it came to keeping Starbucks and those other places out of E-Town. I understand that we've got to make sure that you have more money in your pocket. So again, I think it's a benefit that we have sports wagering here in Kentucky. But when it comes to you all in this room, again, I want to make sure that we keep our taxes as low as we can, make sure that our education system is as good as it can be, and make sure that we have that low crime so that people want to stay here or bring their families here and decide to live here and thrive here.
As we look to bring new families here to Kentucky, if we continue to grow, we're going to need more housing. Right now, something that makes Kentucky attractive is our cost of living. We have low cost of living in a lot of different areas. Again, we talked about Tennessee. I'm from Nashville originally. People are moving there quickly, but the cost of living is not great anymore. So how would you make sure that we have the types of housing that we need while also keeping things affordable for current and prospective residents?
Well, Jacqueline, I certainly appreciate that question, but I'm going to tweak the premise just a little bit because I don't know. I mean, maybe you all have had a different experience, but as I travel this Commonwealth, right now, no one is thinking that things are affordable. I mean, they're thinking about their gas bills that are going up, their energy prices that are going up. They're thinking about the fact that it's harder to secure that child care. And I think all of us in this room recognize that. And that's why, again, it is important to eliminate that income tax. I think we need to have affordable housing. And certainly, as the next governor, I want to work with our legislature to make sure that that is a priority so that as families are deciding to move here, there's a place to stay. But in addition to that, if you start doing a Google search about Louisville or Kentucky, you know, one of the things that I think you will find is that, you know, our governor let out 2,000 criminals. Our governor shut down our schools for 2 years. Our governor made a decision to shut down our churches. If I'm somebody from out of state that sees that a governor did that, it makes it less attractive to come to that place. You talk about Tennessee, you know, they opened up their economy. You talk about Georgia, they opened up their economy. Florida, their economy. But again, we look more like what Gavin Newsom did in California than what those red state governors did. So when you talk about affordability, you need to have a governor that's willing to push back against the Biden administration. And I've certainly demonstrated that over the course of these last 3.5 years, whether it's pushing back against the EPA. Look, affordability, you think about what the Biden administration wants to do. They want to destroy our fossil fuels industry by 2035. That would devastate Kentucky's economy. I mean, we are the 7th largest generator of coal in the country. I know there are coal producers and folks that benefit from coal production here in this room today. We are the 7th largest generator of that coal. And because of it, we have some of the lowest cost and reliable energy in the nation. That helps with affordability. But the Biden administration wants to do away with that. Again, I'm not naive. I recognize that we have to have an across the board or above all energy strategy. But you talk about signature industries. Again, all of you all represent signature industries. Our coal industry, our natural gas industry, our signature industries that we have to protect. And on that front, our current governor has been silent because he cannot speak out against the Biden administration or the far left of his party. I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to speak out and stand up for those signature industries because it is important that we hold on to those and we maintain those jobs because it's about affordability and making sure that we have low-cost, reliable energy as a part of that strategy.
And that's exactly my next question is about energy. So you mentioned coal. Kentucky is a coal producer.
They've already clapped, so we can move on. We don't even have to have that part.
But we're seeing a changing landscape. We're seeing more battery plants pop up in Kentucky. We're seeing more solar pop up across Kentucky. So what would your administration's energy portfolio look like?
Well, look, again, I'm not naive, and I recognize that we have to have an across-the-board energy strategy. I fully understand that. But when it comes to those signature industries, coal and natural gas, we have got to hold on to those. We've got to do everything we possibly can because, look, there's no secret why these plants end up making their way here. It's because they can get low-cost and reliable energy. And in addition to that, our Republican legislature reformed prevailing wage, made this state a right-to-work state. So I applaud our legislature. I appreciate what they've done on that front. But again, when it comes to maintaining those signature industries, you need a fighter on that front. You need somebody that is willing to go against the grain of the far left and the environmentalists that are trying to destroy our fossil fuels industry. And I will push back alongside Robbie Mills to make sure we maintain our coal and our natural gas industries.
Let's talk a bit about infrastructure. When we think about infrastructure, often we think about our roads and bridges, but it's much larger than that. That's broadband, water infrastructure. So what would your priorities be in terms of infrastructure? Because we know it's so critical to business and to all of our citizens, especially as we look to move goods in and out of Kentucky. Our infrastructure is critical. So what would your priorities be in that area?
Well, look, I certainly want to make sure that before we even start this conversation, to give credit where credit is due. Look, I appreciate our federal delegation, Leader McConnell and others that went to bat for Kentucky to make sure that the infrastructure dollars were coming into our Commonwealth. I mean, that's really important for some of the projects that we have coming online, whether it is the Brent Spence Bridge or the I-69 corridor. Again, those are things that happened because our federal delegation made a decision that they wanted to bring dollars into this state to get things going in the right direction. But in addition to that, I mean, I just saw Candace from CVG earlier. I've talked to others within our aviation. I mean, EKU right now has a terrific aviation program. I mean, we have got to make sure that we're doing everything we can to continue to keep this Commonwealth expanding in terms of its global presence. And the way that we do that is through our airports, through UPS, through DHL, through Atlas Air. And that's going to be a big part of the portfolio. But when it comes to our roads, in addition to those big projects, look, over the course of maybe 3 years, Kentucky was maybe top 5 in terms of the number of road fatalities. And a lot of those happened on our rural roads. And so in addition to making sure that we have projects, these big projects that we're working on, we also need to take care of our rural roads because most of us, that's where we're doing a lot of traveling in state is on those rural roads. And we've got to keep our people safe. There's no question about that. And I'm going to prioritize those rural roads. When you talk about our navigable waterways, I mean, we have more navigable waterways than the majority of the states here in this country. And because of it, we're able to transport coal and other commodities on our rivers. We've got to make sure our ports and our barges, that they're getting the right attention. And I'll certainly be the governor as the next governor of this Commonwealth to prioritize that beginning in January of next year.
We've talked a lot about things we want to do to make Kentucky better. Let's talk about something that we usually lag behind on, which is our health outcomes. We continually rank at the very bottom when it comes to how healthy we are in Kentucky. And people have tried to deal with that over the years, but how would you try to tackle how unhealthy a lot of these outcomes tend to be?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things, the health outcomes has been something that I think, most of us have been frustrated by. And I know there are a lot of healthcare providers that are in this room right now that are working their tail off. And let me say this as well, to our healthcare providers that were fighting daily to keep folks alive during 2020 and 2021, thank you. My hat goes off to you. God bless you for what you did to stay. That's right. Yeah. So we've certainly got to make sure, you talk about workforce. I mean, I can't think of an industry that has been hit harder by workforce than our nurses and our healthcare providers. And so I want to do whatever is possible to shore up our nursing shortages so that our hospitals, whether they be in our cities or our rural areas, have enough to fuel those facilities. I also want to make sure that we're utilizing telehealth. I mean, particularly in our rural areas. I mean, if somebody needs to get a checkup and they can't get to a brick and mortar, let's make sure that we're using telehealth to get that person connected. And then also when it comes to our rural hospitals, making sure that Medicaid coverage continues to be there. I'm certainly going to support that along with the rate improvement program. I mean, I know that's important because I've talked to a number of our rural healthcare providers because that made the difference between the reimbursements between inpatient and outpatient care. So we're going to continue to focus on that as well. But again, I bring up that issue of workforce because it is so critical. The other area that I think we have to continue not only to talk about, but to take action is on the opioid epidemic. And we know that the opioid epidemic has been a sizable contributor to the poor health outcomes that we see in our Commonwealth. And now my predecessor certainly had filed a lot of lawsuits on this front, but we weren't getting any money at that time. And I made the conscious decision to say, it's time to move past talking about the opioid epidemic and actually take action on it. And so we fashioned an agreement with our legislature to bring in nearly $900 million into the state. We're in the process of doing that right now. I saw Judge Moore earlier. I know Judge Vogel over in Oldham County. Our judges and our mayors are already receiving that money to help fight this epidemic and to remove this thorn from our side that has plagued our people for far too long. I want to continue to work on that front because I know that it is equally important to addressing those health outcomes if we get it right and end this opioid scourge in the Commonwealth of Kentucky.
As our time comes to a close, I have two quick questions that I want to ask each of you as a wrap up. And I'm not going to make you answer this one last, so we'll do this one first. And I had this on my list, but our Civic City winner, Javon, also brought it up, so I think that it's definitely necessary that we ask. I'd like for each...
Representing Pike County, by the way.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
I'd like for each of you, obviously starting with you, to say one nice thing about your opponent.
One nice thing about my opponent?
Yes.
Well, look, I would have had a lot of nice things to say about him until he ran that ad against me today. But look, I will tell you all, and I've told this to people countless times. As a third-year lawyer, when I came out of practicing I was clerking for 2 years, and in my third year of practice, I was at Stites and Harbison. It's no secret to anybody. I mean, most of you all know that Andy and I worked together at Stites and Harbison. And he was the first lawyer to give me work there. And I always have appreciated that. And in fact, when he signed my papers, when I became the Attorney General, I said, I got that strange sensation that he was marking up my papers again as he did when I was an associate at Stites and Harbison. Look, he's a good family man. There's no question about that. And, certainly appreciate his heart as it relates to his family.
And in our final minute, I'd love to hear what your favorite thing about living in Kentucky is. Your favorite thing about Kentucky?
Well, my wife, Mackenzie. That's the easy one. Look, I've enjoyed. I mean, it has been the great privilege to live in this Commonwealth. And, I happen to play a little college football down the road. Play is a very generous term, I assure you. But this Commonwealth has been good to me. I mean, I went to undergrad and law school at U of L. I clerked for a federal judge, Greg Van Tatenhove. I then worked at Stites and Harbison, and then worked in D.C. as Senator McConnell's legal counsel, and then came back and worked with, I saw Corey Skolnick and Tom Bryan in here somewhere at Frost Brown Todd. And then I got to serve as the 51st Attorney General of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And mind you, again, I talked about the fact that my parents owned a small business in E-Town. There was a cross-section of our community that came in there. People still talk about it to this day. So this Commonwealth has meant everything to me. And I've been honored to serve as its 51st Attorney General, and I hope I get the opportunity to serve as the next governor of this Commonwealth. May God bless you. God bless Kentucky. Thank you.
Thank you so much, General Cameron. Great to see you. Move this way. Thank you so much again. And just a reminder to everyone, we did cover quite a bit of ground, but we will have our voters guide next month for these issues as well. So at this time, I think, I'm looking at Kyle. Okay. I obviously want to welcome our 63rd governor of the Commonwealth, Andy Beshear. So please stand and help me welcome Governor Andy Beshear. Kyle's pointing this way. Here he comes. Governor Beshear, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. Thank you all.
So let's jump right in. We just had a wonderful conversation, and I'd like to talk about a lot of the same topics with you. First, I want to start off with economic development. In your last 4 years, we've seen a lot of big investments in Kentucky, a lot of great announcements. How do we continue that progress, and do you give any of that credit to the General Assembly and the pro-growth policies they've passed in the last few years as well?
Well, first, thanks to the Chamber for having me tonight, and thanks to each and every one of you. I look out on this crowd and I see people that I have had the pleasure of working with these last 4 years. And with what we've done, there's enough credit to go around. I think Rick Gaines is in the audience tonight. Without him, we wouldn't have landed the biggest investment in the history of the Commonwealth of Kentucky at $5.8 billion, 5,000 new jobs. That Ford SK On plant has changed everything. I think we got John. Yeah. When you think about credit, I mean, look at John Crockett and LG&E providing the power to that facility. Couldn't make it happen without it. You know, economic development is a team sport, and my goodness, this team is on a historic winning streak. Since I've become governor, we have had a record amount of private sector investment, $27 billion, more than in any other governor's term, whether they serve 4 or 8 years, or as I say it, take that, Steve Beshear. But in all seriousness, we're coming off our 2 best years of economic development by far. We're in the midst of what will be our 3rd best year for economic development. And now, since it's football season, and for the first year ever in Kentucky, you can bet on the games if you so choose. We did that together.
Yes.
When you are on a historic win streak, you don't fire the coach. You don't sub out the quarterback. You keep that team on the field, you rack up those wins, and you bring home some championships. This is our time. I mean, we're home to the biggest investment in the history of Ford and Amazon. We're being picked time and time again. Number 2 in per capita economic development last year. Number 3 in the creation of rural jobs. I mean, we just ranked 5th in Site Selection's Prosperity Cup rankings, but for the first time ever, we're number 1 in our region, beating out these 2 states called Tennessee and Texas. I mean, that's almost as good as when you bet against Duke. But it is special. And listen, there is enough credit to go around. We wouldn't have landed the Ford plant without the special session where we got that legislation through. But at the end of the day, if we're creating 5,000 new jobs there, 2,000 at AESC, 300 great jobs at Pratt Paper, what we should be excited about is that there are that many more Kentucky families that have a great job that brings them dignity, that brings security to their family. But the most important thing is opportunity to the next generation. And coming off the 3 best years ever, we have the momentum to leave a collective legacy that is not mine, but all of ours, of more opportunity for the next generation than we ever thought was possible. I think that's what we're all working towards. A job in Democrat or Republican, a new bridge in red or blue, unless Jim Gray paints it that way. I mean, just an opportunity to do special things together, like a number of initiatives we've got with the chamber that I know we'll talk about here in a little bit.
Let's talk about tax reform. That's one of those pro-growth policies we're talking about. You lately have been talking about tax reform. I know that you acknowledge the shortfall that we've experienced as we look to continue to lower the individual income tax. So as we look to the next 4 years, if you're reelected, what would your priorities for tax reform look like?
Well, with a record-setting economy, where we have had the lowest annual unemployment rate last year, the lowest monthly unemployment rate, I think 5 months ago, the longest period of low unemployment we've ever seen, with 2021 and 2022 being our second and third best years for new wages, with us having the 3 biggest budget surpluses in our history, including $1.55 billion this last year, and I know we'll get to it. That means we have plenty of money to give our public school educators the big raise they deserve. Let's further down. When we have that type of economy, our people ought to benefit from it. That's why I was able to sign a decrease in the income tax. We've been able to lower the property tax rate, I believe, 3 times since I was governor. We were able to use enough general fund to backfill the road fund to freeze the gas tax and the property tax on vehicles when it was hurting people the most. But what we have to do is to be responsible about it. You know, if we do this right, and I think the General Assembly has put in a framework that agree or disagree, I think they're trying to do it responsibly. A rush like my opponent talks about to get to zero on the income tax as quickly as possible would turn us into Kansas. You can only do it one of 2 ways. First, he would dramatically increase the sales tax and apply it to things like groceries and medicine, because you can't come up with enough revenue otherwise, or gut public education, public safety, and healthcare. You know, everything in moderation is the way we get where we're supposed to go, and make sure that we can fund those essentials for our families at the same time.
I have to bring this up because General Cameron brought it up. He mentioned the vetoes of the tax reform bills that you've had. So walk us through those decisions.
Sure, I've had 2 bills come to me to reduce the income tax. The second one, the one that I signed, was a straight reduction after having the best year ever in terms of state revenue. The first one wasn't just a cut to the income tax, as you know. It was an increase on a lot of sales taxes. Sales taxes, some of which have been repealed, but were there on conventions that would hurt this hotel and many others. There was also an increase in income tax on background checks that volunteer organizations run to protect the kids. You know, when I was a private sector employee, part of my practice was putting in youth protection programs that are so desperately needed. And the idea that you would make those more expensive and thus fewer would be run would mean that our kids wouldn't be as safe as they were.
We've started off on a high note with some really good things that have happened in Kentucky. What's not working in our economy right now as we look to the next 4 years?
Well, listen, we've got some challenges, but they are challenges I'm thrilled to have. If we went back to April of 2020, and you'd have told me that 2 years later, we'd be creating so many jobs across Kentucky that we need to attract more people here, I'd say I will take that challenge in a minute. I mean, for so long, we looked at the glass as half empty. Listen, our glass is so full at the moment, we need a bigger glass. And that's because everyone has been working so hard to bring in the types of jobs that we have dreamed about for so long. I mean, we're the electric vehicle battery production capital of the United States of America. That's us right here in Kentucky. I mean, when you look at, Candace, the Amazon facility, which is enormous, at that amazing northern Kentucky, Cincinnati Airport, it's on our side of the river, you see one of the most technologically advanced facilities that are out there. But all these are challenges that we can address together. You look at a workforce challenge, look at our nursing shortage, which is real. There's one way to look at it in that when we have a nursing shortage, it impacts healthcare and not being able to provide the type that we need to. The other way to look at it is we have thousands of really good jobs in all parts of Kentucky, including Eastern Kentucky, that need to be filled. So what we do is we have direct partnerships, like working with Donovan at Pikeville Medical Center, or Holly at ARH, and so many others that are out there doing this work now with pipelines from high schools thanks to $240 million in investments in career and technical education. Pipelines like our nursing programs, now working more directly with hospitals. St. Clair has a program where they pay tuition for certain nursing students if they agree to work for a certain number of years for that hospital. We are coming up with solutions, I believe, faster than many. And it's about working together to get there. But again, we have always talked ourselves down. And when CEOs from across America or across planet Earth are looking at us for their biggest investments ever, it's time we talk ourselves up. I mean, for far too long, we've said, oh, what about Tennessee? You know what? Tennessee's looking at us right now saying, what about Kentucky? That's a pretty special thing.
Let's talk a little bit more about workforce in particular. We just saw some new numbers that came out yesterday that showed the unemployment numbers ticking up just a little bit while our workforce participation rate still is very, very low. It's an issue that affects everyone in this room, as we know. So what are your plans to address the dismally low workforce participation rates, and how do we continue to grow our workforce?
Well, as you know, each month, the federal government and ultimately Kentucky put out two numbers. There are two different surveys that are done. One is the household survey, which you're referencing. The other is a survey of business owners about how many jobs are filled in Kentucky. Yes, we need to increase our workforce participation, but we have more jobs filled in the Commonwealth of Kentucky now than ever before in our history. So again, while we work to address challenges, let's not talk ourselves down. Let's build ourselves up. You want to know who believes that we can solve our workforce challenges? Ford does. That's why they made their biggest investment ever in Kentucky. You know who else does? Pratt Paper. We just opened $1 billion facility, the cleanest, greenest recycled paper mill on planet Earth. It's in Henderson. 320 jobs paying $39 an hour. The fact that the private sector believes and knows that we will work with them directly to address it is why they have faith in us. And we're doing it in a couple of ways. I mean, the first way is to make sure we don't lose a single graduating senior from any of our high schools. I mean, look at what you can earn right out of high school right now. More than ever before, you can support yourself, you can support others. So our Everybody Counts program is this big, bold, ambitious goal that we place every graduating senior in Kentucky, either in higher ed if they want to go there, or directly into a job with one of the major employers. When you combine that with that $240 million investment in career and technical education, it means the employers get in to the high schools. They get their equipment and their training there. We see that with a number of the industries that are here with the talent pipeline and others that we're working on together. We're doing the same thing with KCTC. I hope you all saw the Education First Employer program because it is a sea change on how KCTC works. It used to be that you would graduate a certain number of people with a diploma or a certificate, and you would expect the employer to find them. They've opened up their doors and are now welcoming the employers directly in to create that pipeline where you can track your workforce a couple years out. But there are other things that keep people out of the workforce. You know, childcare is a huge issue. And the fastest way to get those that are out of the workforce back in, we saw it in Washington, D.C., is to fund universal pre-K for every 4-year-old in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. It's about $170, $180 million. With a $1.55 billion surplus, it's easily affordable. It lets other childcare providers focus on 3 and under because right now we don't have enough spots there for everybody and would still be too full. That's why we're working with those providers, have up reimbursements and provided payments to try to keep people going in a difficult time. And the last thing is we have to get more of our people healthy. It's why I expanded Medicaid for vision, hearing, and dental. Because if someone's out of the workforce and we want them to go to a job, they've got to be able to see well enough to drive to the job. A pair of glasses isn't that expensive. Let's get them for them. Or if we want them to be safe at a work site, they got to be able to hear the warnings and the instructions. Let's get them a hearing aid. It doesn't cost that much. It also means that we have to continue working with our hospital systems that have done such great work. My opponent's physician, and he attested to it in a survey and signed his name that he would work to repeal the ACA, would destroy the health of our people. Repealing the ACA would remove coverage for pre-existing conditions like cancer and asthma and even pregnancy. But more than that, repealing the ACA would eliminate expanded Medicaid. That is 600,000 people that would lose coverage almost right away. It's hard to be healthy enough to go to work if you don't have any health care coverage at all. And ask any of our rural or urban hospitals in here, it would bankrupt them almost overnight. Listen, when we're talking about workforce, it's about the whole. It's about providing what's needed. It's about investing in public education, healthcare, childcare. Yes, it's somewhat complicated, but we have solved so many complicated issues working together. And I know with the people in this room, we'll come up with that next set of solutions too.
Again, going back to something your opponent just talked about, he brought up education, and education and workforce go hand in hand. He brought up education learning loss during COVID, obviously pointing to when we first started the pandemic and the shutdowns that happened there. What is your focus as we move forward to make sure that kids are making up any lost learning?
Well, I believe in public education. I'm a product of Kentucky's public schools, and I would not be where I am today without teachers that had invested in a somewhat shy kid that did not have the confidence. Were there for me throughout those years, and I am so grateful every day for what they did for me. Our public school educators are heroes, but they have been villainized over and over and over. They've had to endure failures to fund their professional development, which we require them to get. And my opponent and others have accused them of doing things in the classroom that don't happen. It is time we lift up our educators, and you know what, folks? The way we catch up a kid in math is to make sure there's a math teacher there every day. And because in the last survey that was put out, we were 44th in starting teacher pay, 40th in average teacher pay, we're not there. Our Education First plan would provide an 11% across the board raise for every public school employee. That'd move us to the mid-20s on teacher pay. But you know what it would also do? It would allow us to hire enough bus drivers to make sure every child is safe and that every child can get to school. But that plan also goes back and funds universal pre-K, because if we want to improve reading scores, how about we make sure that no child starts kindergarten behind when it's so hard for them to catch up? It also makes sure we're fully funding pupil transportation. I mean, one district got slighted $18 million they had to make up in other ways just because of that. You know, that's in law, but it's suspended in just about every budget. So the number one thing that will help us catch up our kids is to actually fund public education the way we should. And think about it for just a second. Our public school systems are the largest employers in most of our counties. So if we aren't paying a living wage to those employees, we are impoverishing ourselves. These are our families, and we ought to be investing in them the right way.
In the last conversation, we talked about energy and how that makes Kentucky attractive, especially with the low cost of energy because of the different platforms we have here in Kentucky. So what is your position on the coal industry, as Kentucky is a big coal producer, and what would your energy portfolio look like?
I've supported the coal industry. It creates incredible jobs where people have supported not just their family, but multiple other families. And I've shown that, both as Attorney General, when I stood up to certain EPA rules, as well as governor, where we've opposed them as well. See, I believe in an all-of-the-above energy policy and the jobs that come with all of it. When you look at everything we're building right now and the power it takes to run them, we need every bit of production that we can. That means traditional energy sources. That means the energy sources of the future. We can invest in all of it to make sure we have both the jobs and the load that we need for these plants.
Let's talk a little bit about housing. Again, as we look to attract more population here in Kentucky, there are going to need to be a lot of different options for housing, different kinds of housing, and making sure they're affordable. What would your plan be to do that?
You know, when you're the governor that has governed after a F4 tornado, goes through Mayfield, goes through your dad's hometown of Dawson Springs and wipes out 70% of every home or apartment that's there, goes through Bremen and takes just a tragic toll when you look at the number of people who've lived in the town and how many we lost. And you watch the rebuilding, it gives you an appreciation for having a roof over your head and what it means. I mean, it's so much bigger than just that basic need that we think about. It's where you feel safe with your family. It's where you make memories. A home is different than a house, but you can't have a home without a house or an apartment. It's one of the reasons that I made that pledge to rebuild every home and every life, and they are intertwined, and we are going to get that done. You know, in Mayfield, we've gone from building homes to building neighborhoods, and it is incredible to see. And that's going to be the newest town in Kentucky here in just a little bit. And proud, working with everybody there locally, that we've now announced, I think, over 500 new jobs in Graves County since the tornadoes. It's going to be an amazing comeback story. But housing was a challenge in eastern Kentucky before the flooding. And so many people lost not only their homes, but everything they had. I mean, when you're hugging somebody and you say, "What'd you make it out with?" And she says, "I'm wearing it." And literally only the clothes on their back. You think about what starting over means. So one step for more affordable housing is putting more money into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Listen, the private sector is great at developing affordable housing if it is properly incentivized, if we make the economics work. And the Affordable Housing Trust Fund leverages those private sector dollars in a good and in a special way. Now, we're about to announce, I think, $15 million of that has to go to Eastern and Western Kentucky, that working with the General Assembly got through, and the SAFE Act to help both the East and the West, and we need to see more of that. You know, we've got a lot of developments going on in our bigger cities, but we need to see more affordable housing across rural Kentucky as well. So working in the next session, and as we move forward, how do we make that trust fund work for all of Kentucky, and how do we address the economics to make them work? I mean, in many ways, it's no different than what we're doing in broadband. Folks, I've been lucky enough to make the two biggest public sector investments in broadband in the history of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. I think we're about $600 million between public and private, and I appreciate the General Assembly working with us, getting that passed through. They deserve credit for it too. But with what's about to come down from the federal government, $1.1 billion, that we will pair with another $1.1 billion of private dollars, we're going to get internet, high-speed internet to every home and every business across Kentucky, and I think we're going to do it in the next 4 years. I mean, what we've got a chance to do on not just building affordable housing, but making sure it has the infrastructure of now, because broadband isn't the infrastructure of the future, it's the infrastructure of right now. We've got a chance to make that not just a home, but a successful home. And as we're creating more opportunities for our kids and the next generation than we could have imagined, making sure that their parents are healthy, that they have health care coverage, that they're getting the best public education, that they've got high-speed internet, which they have to have in their home, that they're getting enough to eat. Those are all those kind of wrap around needs that we all work together to address. And there are so many people in this room, whether you're in the nonprofit sector or through your business, that help make that happen. And I'm grateful. I'm grateful for what we are doing together, the relationships that we've formed, and I'm excited about what more we can do.
When we talk about attracting people to Kentucky, we make sure that we have an attractive quality of life. That means making sure that we have things that people want to do in their communities, walkable communities, all of the things that you hear about in these larger cities that everyone is moving to. But at the same time, people have to feel safe in the communities they want to move to as well. So while we've been working on revamping the criminal justice system in a lot of different ways throughout the state, through new legislation and other things, crime goes hand in hand with that. So what would be your plan to tackle crime while also continuing to revamp the criminal justice?
Let me talk about attracting people and addressing crime if I can, that are both in that question. First, folks, you realize we just came off the best year for tourism in the history of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. We have a great product. Whether that's Red River Gorge and Natural Bridge, the Bourbon Trail that had the most visitors ever in its history. Kevin, thank you, and all of the folks in Bourbon for helping to make that happen. Or whether it's land between the lakes and boating that almost no other state can compare with, we have an amazing product. You realize the economic impact this last year was $12.9 billion. And for so many people, there's a story of a woman in Henderson that came in on a riverboat cruise and never left. Yeah, I mean, we increased our population last year. 19 states didn't. And while we have to do more, we have an amazing product to sell. Now, that's why I put in our last budget, and while it didn't make it through, a talent attraction campaign to make sure everybody sees all the great things that Team Kentucky has to offer. I mean, imagine Red River Gorge and building the 2 biggest battery plants on planet Earth. Things are happening here in Kentucky. This year, we're going to do it a little different. We're going to be announcing that in our budget, there will be a $15 million marketing campaign, but this time it's split. For the state to do part for an overall campaign, but for our regional chambers to be able to use those dollars to do targeted campaigns.